getting settled, so we might as well get started. And I'm Chris Cobler. I'm the CEO and publisher of the Fort Worth Report. And it's great to see so many faces here on a hot summer day. You just never know how many people even want to come out of the house when it's this hot. But it's wonderful to see so many people who are really interested in this issue and care about Fort Worth and really like air conditioning, right? This is a beautiful spot for us to have this event. But I want to start by just thanking all of you. Everybody in this room is a supporter of ours in one way or another. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization, we've been around just a little over a year, and the support we've gotten from the community has just been overwhelming. And that's why it's possible for us to do these candid conversations. It's because of that support. And we think it's critical to our mission and to what Fort Worth needs is to bring people together, smart people together, to talk about the tough issues that we face as a growing city and look at solutions. A lot of our journalism is based on solutions, but we don't have all the solutions. We want to be able to convene the conversation about those solutions and write about them and get people coming together to take action. So this coming together and taking action is a really key part. So I thank you all for being here. I also want to start by thanking one of our sponsors here, that's Texas Wesleyan. Look at the beautiful space around us. It's been tremendous for me to get to know Fred Slaybach, and his support of the Fort Worth Report has been just tremendous. The slogan of Texas Wesleyan, they really live, and we've seen it, the way that they've helped us as a nonprofit grow. Our offices are just over there on Rosedale, and we're working on having some new offices over on Rosedale, so being part of this community is really special to us. So I wanted to introduce Texas Wesleyan Representative Hector Quintanilla, who is the Vice President of Student Affairs. He's going to say a few words, and after that, I'll come back up and introduce our moderator and get the discussion going. Thanks. Hector, come on.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Chris, for the introduction. I'm Hector Quintanilla. I'm the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs here at Texas Wesleyan University. I've been an employee at Texas Wesleyan for 27 years, so I have seen a lot of change, and much of that change has come in the last 10 years. The university, through the support of its community partners, federal governments as well, have been able to invest $78 million here in the Southeast Corridor, particularly along this Rosedale corridor, and of course including this Martin University Center, which we're so happy that you are here this morning with us. And if you're a first-time visitor, we certainly hope that you come back again and enjoy the facilities. And these facilities are available for use by the public. So all you have to do is call the institution and they can make the appropriate reservations with the time permitting, of course. Texas Wesleyan, as I mentioned, has gone through a significant reinvestment here in Southeast Fort Worth to revitalize and support the economic development here in our area. And we're continuing that effort through a $40 million comprehensive campaign. The most notable recent or future addition, near future addition, is the Karen Kramer Stadium. So just directly west of where we are working on a new track and football and really multi-use facility that we will be playing our future football games at and other sporting events. And so we hope that you have the opportunity to come and enjoy that facility as well. It will be also open to other community partners, and so we hope to see you back on the campus again soon. And I hope that today you enjoy your time here. And of course, if there's anything we can do for you, please let me know. It's a pleasure seeing all of you this morning, and I hope you have a great meeting. Thank you.
Exciting to be part of the Rosedale Renaissance over here, and we're trying to create a renaissance in local journalism. So these partnerships in Fort Worth are tremendous. And I want to thank our other sponsors along with Wesleyan tonight, or this morning, Southside Bank, including Keisha High is here, so thank you very much. Thank you. And North Texas Community Foundation, Rose Bradshaw is here, and Margaret Kramer, so thank you. Thank you so much. Introduce our moderator, and he'll introduce the panel, Travis Clegg. Travis has extensive experience with residential design and management and currently serves as a board member for the Real Estate Council of Greater Fort Worth. He is Vice President and Principal of Pelican Land Solutions and knows the Fort Worth housing market like the back of his hand, it says here. So, all right. Thanks, Travis.
Get our panelists to join us up here. This was not the order we discussed. So first we'll do some quick introductions, but I want to thank Texas Wesleyan for allowing us to be here. Fort Worth Report, it's a great program. I love reading the articles. So thank you for having us. Thanks for having this discussion. So first, do some introductions. I did a lot of Googling last night on people here on the stage, and they have impressive resumes. And I don't want to get to the 5-minute long list of all the things they do, both with their jobs, but also with the nonprofits and the time they spend in this community. So I'll do some quick introductions, and then we'll jump into the conversation, which I know you guys want to hear. So first to my left here, Don Allen is a partner with Lackland Holdings, Fort Worth Development Company. He was previously with D.R. Horton. He's an engineer, past the Carlene Burgess, and he's the past president of the Fort Worth Builders Association and the future president of the Texas Association of Builders. So Don has got a lot of history here in Fort Worth on the housing industry. Amy, sitting next to him, Amy Connolly with the City of Fort Worth. She's the Assistant Director of Neighborhood Services, and she spends all of her time dealing with this particular issue. So we're happy to have Amy as well. Carlene Thomas King is a licensed real estate broker and the owner of Ty Bryan Realty. Did I get that pronounced right? And she's on the board for the Fort Worth Housing Authority, correct?
Fort Worth Housing
Solutions. Okay. And then Ann Zadeh. Ann Zadeh is currently with the Executive Director of Community Design Fort Worth. Read a nice article this morning on Community Design Fort Worth, talking about I-30. She's a past zoning commissioner in Fort Worth, where we first met, and I got to duel with Ann at the podium. I learned a lot from Ann, by the way.
You were doing the right thing, we weren't doing.
I learned so much. And so she's a past District 9 City Councilwoman here in Fort Worth. So thank you guys for. So why don't we take a quick minute and discuss your roles in the affordable housing industry, and we'll just start in a row this time, but I got it kind of switched up and going on. So Don, let's go first.
Thanks, Travis. I'm a local real estate developer, and most of my work is in more greenfield building of new subdivisions within the city and within other cities throughout Dallas-Fort Worth. So I don't have as much experience with the in-town and redevelopment efforts as some of the other folks on the panel here, but I can speak to the industry, what's going on in the housing market overall, and all of those things impact everything and down to the smallest individual home buyer anywhere in the Metroplex or anywhere in the country, frankly.
Sure. I am a city planner by training, but have moved into working in the area of affordable housing development. My specialty is looking at the ways to bring more housing to people that are 80% or below area median income. So the most vulnerable of our population, the people that need housing, and and looking at ways to bring more housing to them, both multifamily, single family, and all different ways that they can be housed.
I guess the best way to explain what I do, I'm boots on the ground with people who are having the biggest struggle trying to get that American dream home ownership. The not so affordable housing market is where I work. So, we have to serve now as not only real estate brokers looking out for our clients, but also counselors, because these people are getting very, very disheartened and discouraged because they're not able to reach that dream that a lot of other people have had the opportunity to get.
So at
think in my introduction, Travis touched on some of the roles that I've played. I'm not an expert in affordable housing, but I have played a role in various ways, being involved in a neighborhood association in my own community, serving on the zoning commission where we made decisions that definitely impact housing affordability, and also being on the council where we were making policies that also affect that topic. So I'm also a planner by training and background and worked as a planning consultant in the Dallas-Fort Worth area many moons ago. So I have familiarity with the whole region. And in my current role, we do a lot of advocacy and education around urban planning issues. Hopefully to have those kind of conversations like we're having here today, not in the face of a particular development that is being proposed, but just the concepts and ideas so that people are more familiar when something that would definitely improve the livability of their community is proposed, that they might not be so prone to saying no to things that would bring more affordability to a community.
Thank you. So the big elephant in the room is the housing market has changed dramatically in the past, not 2-3 years, but even more so in the last 6 months. It's gotten out of control. Interest rates are going up. Housing, the labor market's going up. The supply chain is slowed down. Things are just taking longer. And so they're pushing the prices of housing up. We do, at Peloton, Donna attends well, RSI is a group that does residential strategies and talks about the housing market. In the last 6 months, if you took the same house in January versus a house today, the principal and interest have gone up 40% just based on the interest rates and the labor and the materials costs that have gone up. So based on the recent changes in the affordable housing market, how has your job duties changed recently? And we'll start with Amy on this one.
Well, I think over the last 2 years, a big change in my job duties has certainly been the impact of the pandemic and all the federal money that's come to the city to assist renters with emergency rental assistance, to various pots of federal money that are specifically designed for low-income individuals and/or housing, and trying to ensure that those funds get spent. So it's been a lot of money. It's north of $150 million, and we complain in the tough times that we never have enough money, and then we get money, and it all comes in at once, and you're like, oh my goodness, how are we going to do this? But it's given us some opportunity to do some game-changing projects. I think you've all read about Casa de Esperanza, a project that was funded by the city to house formerly homeless individuals, and so we are able to do projects that we could never maybe have dreamed about prior to the pandemic. But now that interest rates are dramatically increasing and the cost of labor and materials is dramatically increasing, development deals that we had planned on doing this year are suddenly not feasible, and they're requiring tremendous amounts of gap financing from the city in order to make those work. So really, we're really back at the square, looking at these pro formas and trying to do everything we can to make affordable housing development feasible, but it's taking a lot of incentives from the city and other sources to make them go. We was just in Austin last week talking to the TDHCA, who oversees affordable housing and tax credits, and they're even seeing that the amount of deals that they had previously awarded for 4% or even 9% tax credit deals are just not able to move forward. So it's going to be pretty devastating to our industry until we figure out a way to make that work.
Carlene?
Okay.
Shoot us straight.
So, yeah, I was telling them this morning, I said this is the most frustrating time in all my years of being in real estate, because we're out here as real estate agents and brokers trying to spend up all this money that they have for the first-time home buyers. And we go and we're promoting the program. But what we're seeing is that our clients are not able to compete with the investors that have cash in their pocket. Even those that are approved for, we're not even going to discuss the Fort Worth Housing Solutions, our clients. They're pretty much out of the game at this point. But even my clients who are approved for say $500,000 or $600,000. Do they have $500,000 or $600,000 cash in their pocket? Few people have that they're willing to just shell out on a house. So this is what we're facing. We have to compete with the corporate investors. So it's not just the ones that are looking for the rehab properties and things like that. We've got the corporate companies out here that are just coming in, going straight to the builders and buying up houses in blocks. Our clients can't, most people cannot compete with that. The people that are moving in from California, New York, selling what we would consider, maybe $100,000 house, but they just got $500,000 for it. They're coming here with cash, and they're like kids in a candy store. So I can come here and I can take about $300,000 and I can get something a whole lot better than what I just left. I can pay cash for it, but again, our own residents here in Tarrant County in Texas cannot do that. We can't compete. So I'm not sure what the solution is other than to some kind of way we got to, wrangle in the investors and these corporate buyers so that there's an opportunity. We used to see a lot of homes that were specifically for first-time home buyers. I haven't seen that in a while. I haven't, foreclosures are out the door. We just have no inventory. And so COVID didn't help us at all because people aren't moving, they're not selling, they're not doing things like that. But then to have the investors and these companies and other people with just cash money coming in, an FHA loan, we don't even try to present contracts with FHA loans because they're just not taking them. So, it's a fight to get a contract accepted these days. If you're a buyer's agent, you're some.
Don't quote my numbers, by the way. And
So it hasn't really changed my job because the way I've looked at things, it's always been a conversation about advocating and educating for the type of development and the inventory that is needed. And we've been having that conversation forever. Now it's heightened now. But some of the things that I've done as a zoning commissioner, as a council person who was making policy, and now as someone who's educating and advocating, is those conversations about the fact that there's a lack of inventory. We can't put up a wall around Fort Worth and tell people they can't move here. A lot of people are moving here, and the inventory is not there. So every year on the city council, planning and data analytics would explain that the occupancy rates in the multifamily housing that's here in the city were in the high 90s. And that people were trying to purchase homes and they were going into, offering over asking price, and there's just not the inventory. And then when someone proposes to build something, we often run up against people who already own homes, concerned about what that development might do to their home and their property values and that sort of thing. So the advocacy and education piece is making sure that we promote the development that will be beneficial to those looking for homes and not negatively impactful to those who already own homes, and having the conversation about what a mix of income in an area does for a community, that it's not a negative thing that one should gear up and fight against. Now, there are some externalities that happen when a lot of people move to an area and all want to drive their own single occupancy vehicle. That leads to congestion and issues of parking. So almost every time there's a zoning conversation, people are like, what about the parking? What about all the cars? So everyone who knows me knows I'm a big proponent of public transportation and a multimodal solution, not telling people they can't drive, but not trying to fix all of the problems of moving people around a community, and especially the denser parts of a community, in their single occupancy vehicles. So you can drive, we're not taking away all of the ability to drive. It's just a multimodal solution, so that we're not constantly having to worry about car storage when we're talking about where people are going to live. I think we put a lot more money and effort into making sure people have a place for their cars than we have put into a place for people, and I think that's the conversations that we continue to have at Community Design Fort Worth with communities so that they can have a say in what their community looks like and develops like. In areas where we've done that, they're highly desirable, so those prices have gone up because, again, there's not enough inventory to satisfy all the people that want to live in that area. So providing more, supply demand.
more housing, that's what I'm hearing. So Don, how's it changed your duties with the affordable housing and the prices going up?
Well, honestly, I think we're at one of those maybe inflection points or turning points. We don't know where we are today in the housing market yet. But certainly the very rapid rise in mortgage rates should give everyone pause as far as just predicting what will happen in our industry moving forward, as well as coupled with the costs that have risen dramatically, and I'll talk about supply and demand and cost in a little bit, but between the rising cost to build a house today, to deliver it to market, and then the rises in mortgage rates, as you said, Travis, that it's that same house price or that same payment has gone up on the same house 40%. That's pretty dramatic. That's going to eliminate some buyers from the buying pool of a new home or a resale or whatever. I mean, one thing we're seeing here that is historically unique is that in my career, typically, new home, whatever the median price of a new home was, and it's gradually crept up over the years until the last 2 years when it's risen so much more dramatically. But the average price of a resale listing in MLS was maybe 2/3 of the price of the median new home in the Metroplex. It was always quite a bit lower. Today, and just saw some of this week, the median price of a resale home in Dallas-Fort Worth is $407,000. The median price of a resale in MLS is $407,000. The median price of a new home is $406,000, which both are high, but it's pretty incredible to see how the price of resales have driven so dramatically, and it's demand driven. There's a lack of supply compared to the demand. Again, I'll get into that a little more later, but this was a few years ago, the Real Estate Center at Texas A&M did an analysis for the Texas Association of Builders, and for every $1,000 that you raise the price of a new home, 22,000 Texans are eliminated from qualifying for a mortgage for that new home. And obviously that fluctuates. The higher the mortgage rates rise, the larger that number will become for every $1,000.
So you got people coming in from out of town who are buying these homes, or investors that Carlene mentioned.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and obviously they can afford them and they can do that, but we have a real affordability problem. Actually, I sat on a seminar with A&M Real Estate Center, and I might even an Aggie, a few weeks ago, and they basically said housing affordability is one of the primary problems facing Texas moving forward, economically, and that's a real thing, and builders understand that. Builder would love to deliver a $250,000 starter home, a new home somewhere, and service that market, but it's impossible to do these days. So we don't know where the industry's going. We certainly have our eyes open. Things could slow down a little bit. Things could slow down a great deal. I suspect we'll see it slow down a little bit, but I don't think it'll be dramatic because of the financial underpinnings of the market. The demand are still there. The economy overall is still good, even with inflation. Wages have also risen pretty dramatically in certain sectors, which helps offset the increased housing costs and increased mortgage rates. So there will be some buyers that will be affected and be out of the market, but we still think that there will be buyers out there, but at probably a little lower rate than we've seen in the last couple of years.
So we kind of got into this a little bit, but so we hear about the housing developments being built in the limits of our city, right, out in near the ETJ, outside of our center city, causing traffic issues, stressing the services of our city. Developments inside the loop are few, they're very dense, they're very expensive. What areas of the city are we doing it right, and what areas are we doing it wrong, in your opinion? I'm gonna go to the previous policymaker and first.
So again, I mean, like I talked about with transportation, it's not a right and wrong thing. It's not you can't drive your car. And it's not you should live in this type of housing or that type of housing. I think there is, if you have all the types of housing, then you are providing a product for everyone to live in the way that they want to live. So not everyone wants to live in the urban core in a walkable community. I think everybody wants to live in a walkable community. And so there is a possibility of providing that in various areas of the city. So you talked about ETJ, which when you say things like that, you're supposed to tell people what that means, because not everybody
Good
speaks
point.
plain or nerdy language. Extraterritorial jurisdiction, so on the edges of the city, getting to the places where they're not in the incorporated city. We've allowed development to occur with single-family subdivisions being put down in areas that don't have roads that have been developed to the capacity necessary to accommodate all those people driving in their cars. And people often get worked up about multifamily and think that that's going to cause a lot of traffic, but having 300, 600 homes causes just as much traffic as those multifamily units in a smaller area. So I think it's not a matter of right and wrong, but there are some areas of the city that I'm partial to that have kind of a mix of housing types already in an area that the infrastructure is already built. It does lead, if everyone drives a car, to a little more congestion, but those streets are capable of accommodating that. And I think that what tends to be a problem sometimes is if you have that mix of housing types and they're out of scale with one another. So you can look at a neighborhood like Fairmount, where there are small apartment buildings right next door to single family, and there are duplexes. Over, in various parts of our city, there's duplexes and single family right next to each other, and you wouldn't even know the difference. My dad lived in a neighborhood in Sacramento, California, where on corners there was a duplex, and on the straight part of the street it was a single family home. So from looking at the front of it, it looked like a single family home. What tends to be done now is people building things to the nth degree, so it's completely out of scale. So if somebody's building a new duplex now, it's like 3 stories high with a deck on the top, and that can lead to some consternation and angst from neighbors who don't want to see that character of their community change. So I think there are ways to deliver a variety of housing types that don't go to those extremes and get us the units necessary, the demand of all the different types of housing that people want. But allowing development to occur in areas where those resources don't exist, there's not community centers, fire stations, police stations, leads to residents that are unhappy with their city because they are not being provided the services that other parts of the city have. On the one hand, you bought a house in an area that didn't have those services, and you should have some understanding that those services are not going to appear tomorrow. That's one of the reasons why it's less expensive maybe to purchase a home in that area, because all of those things don't already exist. But I am a big proponent of not telling people they can't develop out in a more far-flung area, but making sure that you develop in a way that is amenable to having those services, not necessarily a car ride away. So a mix of things. Walsh Ranch, I think, is an example of that. There's a mix of housing types in that comprehensive plan for that area. There's plans for commercial, there's plans for all the different services and that sort of thing. So you don't have to get in your car and drive to the core of the city and go through the historic neighborhoods in the city to get to all of those things.
Watching that I'm really excited about are the redevelopment of Cabell Place and Stop 6. The Fort Worth Housing Solutions is doing their own Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant. They're investing millions and millions of dollars in rebuilding what was former public housing into a mixed income neighborhood with a range of different housing types. So there'll be duplexes and fourplexes and multifamily and single family homes built to serve a range of different income levels. And there'll be commercial development and mixed use. It's really the remaking of a neighborhood that is exactly what that neighborhood deserves to have. They need to have a beautiful new neighborhood given what they've experienced over the years. So I'm watching developments like that, and I get really excited about those kind of opportunities where we can intentionally mix incomes and mixed housing types to bring a mix of incomes levels to a neighborhood. And I will say, I live in the near south side, and I've been really impressed. Mistletoe Heights, which is the neighborhood I live in, welcomed an affordable housing development near the hospital district, and it's fitted very well in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood has accepted it. It fits in architecturally with our neighborhood. The density looks, like it fits. It's a really good fit to our neighborhood, and also near, hopefully, a future train station and near the hospital district. So I really do think that we should be looking for more opportunities to mix in affordable housing in existing established neighborhoods in Fort Worth that people want to be in.
Don, I'll give you a chance to talk about this from you're a home builder and a developer, and usually outside the loop of 820. In your opinion, there are some developments that don't do it right. And I think the people that spend a lot of time in Fort Worth, we got council members and zoning commissioners here, planning commissioners here that see those things come through and are like, this is not right. What do you see as the right way to do it versus the wrong way? Are there areas that are doing it right versus wrong?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. As a developer and as builders, we're generally mostly reactive to the market. And our role typically is to provide housing in whatever shape, fashion, or form the market generally wants. So if you're in Fort Worth and you're building greenfield new developments, it's typically going to be single-family detached homes because that is what the majority of home buyers want. However, there is a demand for every type of housing in the city. We understand that and support that. I mean, we need multifamily, we need low-income housing, we need in-town urban mixed-use type of developments, we need redevelopment, we need suburban typical single-family subdivisions. So I think the thing there is that developers and builders are generally reactive to where they can develop, where they can acquire property, what property that has or can be delivered city services. And a lot of times that's what drives a lot of development is where services and where things are. So, I mean, as far as developers, to me, to do it right means to build a neighborhood that, you know, when you walk through there at the end of the day and the neighborhood and you finish building all your houses, that, you know, it's full of people and families, it's well maintained, it has, you know, depending on the size of the neighborhood, you know, has some amenities for your folks to walk, bike, you know, but larger communities have amenity centers, things like that these days, swimming centers for their residents. But providing some of those things for our residents and just walking away feeling like when you drive through there, and you have to be careful because there's kids on bikes all over the place and families out walking and things like that. I mean, it's actually it's a rewarding feeling that you walk around and see, like you see all these families raising their kids there. So, I mean, most responsible developers want to do it right. And just like every other industry, there's folks that kind of cut corners or, you know, maybe don't want to do all the necessary things or whatever to make a community viable and long-term sustainable. But in my opinion, that's one of the ways that we can do it well as a developer. Even if you're building a first-time home buyer subdivision, relatively affordable. I've contended for a long time that the way that some cities used to say, well, we want bigger houses, or we want more brick on houses, we want this or that, and I said, no, the way to make that community sustainable long-term is to put in things in the neighborhood that give it a sense of community, that people will maintain their homes because they feel like they live somewhere. They don't just live in the next block, they live in their neighborhood. When you create a neighborhood, that sustains that neighborhood, I think, as far as the quality of housing, the way people upkeep it, and the values within the neighborhood, more than anything else. So I think that's the way that as developers that we can kind of help build something that will stay there and maintain its value and be a viable community for a long time. So.
I'm going to jump to the next question, Carlene, real quick. Let's get into some solutions, right? So that's what we came here to kind of talk about. So what policies can the city implement to help the rising costs will provide for a more diverse housing mix? I'm going to start with Amy on this one, and then go to Carlene.
I almost feel like you need to go with somebody else.
I mean, you work at the city, can't you just mention?
Right. No, I can't. Yeah, we have to work with our elected officials. Yeah, and we have to do things that they will support. So, you know, I think the first thing that, we are working on is just, and it's at the urging of our elected officials, is really using the existing tools that we have. So the city has lots of tools that are already in our toolbox that we can use to produce more affordable housing, and that's using the Housing Finance Corporation to not only subsidize affordable housing development, but to partner with developers and private-public partnerships to where the HFC can own the land and it can be off the tax rules, and the affordable housing development can be built using usually federal tax credits to subsidize the lower rents. And we can provide affordable housing to people for a period of 30 to 50 years. That's a long time to provide people affordable homes. And so I think that what I would say is that we need to use all the tools that we already have and use them to the most extent that we have. We already have a lot of tools in place. For example, if you are in an incentive development and you're providing housing of any sort, or you're in a tax increment district in Fort Worth, you're required to set aside 10% of your units to affordable housing. And we require that. It's not something you can even buy your way out of anymore. You have to provide at least 10% of those units as affordable units. And so maybe we look at increasing that amount, or maybe we look at figuring out a way to subsidize more affordable housing in existing market rate developments. So, those are sort of the tools that I would recommend that we, take the tools we already have in place, take the tools that are allowed by the Texas legislature, and use them to the most maximum extent that we can.
Carlene?
Okay, so I'm not sure that I know exactly what the solution is, but some things that I've heard that I think would probably help, and it's really going back to basics. I grew up here in Fort Worth. The areas of like Lake Como, I'm going to take that because that's what I'm familiar with. I remember Lake Como when I was coming up. Lake Como was a city within itself. We had the grocery stores, we had laundromats, we had a theater, and gas stations. Everything was right within that 1 square mile. But what I'm seeing now, and it's not that people are against the multifamily mixed-use areas, because there were duplexes, there were small apartments, there are single-family homes, there's commercial, all within the community. I think that that's a definite plus, because you have near Southside, Mistletoe, Pollock, all these areas were exactly the same. They had their own little infrastructure. So even if there's not, mass transportation or what public transportation going through there, it's not a far cry for them to get to grocery stores, to get to the things that they need. And then some of the other things after I got into the real estate was, the city programs, the requirements for, them to have affordable housing. I remember when the Bass Brothers built, up down 4th Street. There were certain units that were, this is a nice area. You wouldn't think that there was affordable housing. And just because you have, a lower income family in that area does not mean that they're going to reduce your values. Because I've seen this with our housing authority clients. I used to tell them, hey, I'd rather work with them because they're organized, they have all their ducks in a row. You ask them for stuff, they give it to you right then. And they keep their properties up. They have pride in what they have. So if we get back to like some of the builders, I realize prices are going to be a lot higher for them now. And I'm not sure what we can do to make housing affordable for them. But if a certain amount of the homes that are being built within these areas are just for them, then it gives us a better chance to be able to get them into a home. Some of them would love to have a townhouse or something like that. But we just have to, figure out how to use the resources that the city has, that the state has, to try to put something in place. So again, I don't know that I know what the solution is. I can tell you all the problems. But
All right. We'll give it a hand.
Yeah, I think Amy touched on the fact that if a somebody is building something and asks the city for some type of relief on taxes or whatever, then they're required to put that certain number of units to be in an affordable range. But that's not providing enough, clearly. There's way more demand than is being provided through that. There are other communities, and I can't name them here today, but we could Google, that have stricter requirements for providing an affordable component, not just when you're asking for incentives. And it goes back to that supply and demand. I mean, as long as there's people demanding, people can build things that are market rate and not need to worry about filling up those units with, getting them full. We're in the high 90s in our occupancy rates, and as long as that continues, people are going to build market rate luxury. And until there's enough units available, I think that's going to be, or the city puts in a policy that requires that affordability component for other reasons besides getting incentives from the city, we're going to still run into that problem. But I think continuing to have the conversation about whether there's a negative impact of having mixed income communities, having mix of types of housing, and that these are not going to be negative impacts for folks that already own homes. But having those conversations and having people in neighborhoods where change happens and where new things are proposed. But again, as someone pointed out, it's not new. These are historic communities in our city that have had this mix of uses for years. And I think I'm going to be known as the person who kept coming back to public transportation and single occupancy vehicles. But when you have a bunch of kids that all drive a car, or you have a dense number of units and everybody has their own car, we need to support other modes of transportation so that you can walk to the local grocery store. I live in a neighborhood that I can walk to a nail salon, a hair place, a hardware store, 3 grocery stores, and those are the kind of things that exist in historic neighborhoods, but in some neighborhoods that have been under resourced from a city perspective and infrastructure and historically underinvested in, those things have gone away. Yeah. So we need to support those things coming back to those neighborhoods.
Sure. One thing, the city does work on these things behind the scenes a lot. So Dana Burndoff, this is Assistant City Manager in Fort Worth. We're working on an infill chapter for the subdivision ordinance to make things easier to develop inside the central city core. A lot of developers don't want to come into the downtown area because it's just too difficult to develop. You're so constrained, so many rules. Our subdivision ordinance is written for what Don and I do outside the loop. So it's built for large neighborhoods and large developments. When you come into the city and apply those same rules, it gets very difficult, and it takes time, years, to get things done on the ground in the central city. So the city's working on that, but time to market's huge. We used to cycle houses, I think it was 125 days, 130 days. Now you're looking at 250
To build a house.
To build a house. And so that just kills the momentum and time to market, and then you see what that does to revenue for the cities and the tax side of things. So I've got a million other questions here, by the way, but I promised Chris we would open it up to our group for questions. Yes, sir.
See a microphone?
Okay, go ahead. Please.
I want to first thank the city of Fort Worth. Yesterday, Bill McDonald, did anybody know who Gooseneck Bill is? Yep. Does anybody know? Great story about Gooseneck Bill was recognized yesterday. I think that's a tremendous, and I'm very proud to be a Fort Worth son about that. Affordable housing, we'll talk about that in a minute. I am commercial real estate. Ann Zadeh knows me. To a developer. City needs to get out of the way. Fort Worth housing, the situation of Fort Worth has created redlining. If you want to see redlining, personally, go to the corner of Allen and Hemphill, where the old 7-Eleven is. Turn around, look toward the city. You'll see nice streetscapes, then turn around and look down Hemphill. You'll see a corridor of just blackness. That's redlining. This is not a game anymore. The city has to wake up to the reality that they have caused these issues. 2 things need to stop. Historical overlays especially on commercial properties like mine, where half of my real estate is no commercial overlay, half of it is in commercial overlay. And when I asked the city to help redesign that, they didn't want to do it. Second thing is urban design. And Zadeh led a group over a year ago down Hemphill to rezone us into the urban design of near South Side. That had capped our real estate, especially commercial properties like mine, at 3 stories. And Zadeh talks about high story properties. In that near South Side area, you have properties going up 10 stories. Go down Rosedale at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's dark because of properties like they created. If you want to see what they did, go down Hemphill and see they took 4 lanes down to 2. For what? Bike lanes. They didn't do it down 8th Avenue. Why? Number one reason, demographics. The demographics of the people that own the real estate on Hemphill are minorities. The people that own real estate on 8th Avenue are not minorities. That is why they did it. The question for my panel is, are we really going to have a really candid conversation about housing? Are we going to let developers come in and take properties that are in commercial viable areas and allow us to develop and tell the city to get out of the way from these little historical overlays and these urban designs? If we don't, there's no housing available. Let's go, anybody after this, I'll take you down the road right here. Between 10 lots that need to be developed. You know why they're not being developed? One major reason. You know why? Because we can't get any lending. You know why? Because no lender wants to lend in this area. No lender wants to lend anything south of Allen. I have proof of that. What my question is this: do you believe the CRM, the Community Reinvestment Act, is going to change things? Because come August, there's going to be a rewrite by the Community Reinvestment Act. And next week, I'll be meeting with the Federal Reserve. And I'm bringing that case forward with the Federal Reserve about what happened on Allen and Hemphill. Thank you.
Anyone take a stab at that one?
There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, we have had some disagreements about things that were done in District 9, and I fully love to hear from everybody and their opinions about different things. I disagree with the characterization that was just shared on that, but I think that the comment about the city getting out of the way, I think we've talked about the time it takes to get through city processes and the comments that you made about changing the processes in the urban core to make that more viable and more attractive. I can't speak to the lending side of things, but there's definitely historic redlining that has impacted this city, and it has impacted cities across the country, and that's something that we need to acknowledge. But I don't think you want the city out of the way when it comes to doing that reinvestment when we have funding available to right the wrongs of the past.
We have a question here from our crowd here. How can we create affordable housing that neighborhoods will accept? So I think there's 2 different ways. You get neighborhoods inside the loop, which I know you kind of talked about on parking and aesthetics and 3-story versus 1-story and the historic nature of that. But we also get a lot of that when we're out in the outskirts doing deals. I just recently did a rezoning case last week, highly contentious, and it's about bringing affordable housing next to people that have nice homes and nice lots. And how do we kind of mix that? I'm going to start with Dawn first on how do you create affordable housing neighborhoods that the adjacent neighborhoods will accept?
Who's on the zoning commission at the time? Seriously, I mean, that's a common, reoccurring, frequent issue, and it's true if you're doing a zoning case within the inner city, anywhere within the loop, or in suburban Fort Worth. I don't want this next to me, not in my backyard type of mentality can be difficult sometimes. I mean, I will say that in general, Fort Worth does a pretty good job, in my opinion, of sticking to generally the facts of the matter, whether it's a zoning case or a plat or whatever, and really I see the commissions and the council analyzing it based on its merits and not necessarily just on the comments and emotions and things like that. That's not always the case, but usually I think the city of Fort Worth it does an excellent job of that as well as they can. But when you've got 50 people all lined up, signing the petition, all wanting to speak, all with their hair on fire saying, you're gonna ruin my life, you're gonna ruin my neighborhood, my kids are gonna die because of the traffic. How many times have Don or how many, y'all, every public official has heard that 1,000 times. And the city, anytime they want to do something on their own, they face the same issues that a developer does, which we've had some discussions leading up to this, and I was kind of laughing at a little bit. But I mean, they've experienced the same thing, that they get the rocks thrown at them just like a developer does when he's trying to get his zoning case approved. But like I say, Fort Worth does a pretty good job at that. But I mean, there has to be some kind of hard decisions made about where the city wants to provide these, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's multifamily housing, whatever the initiative is, there's probably somebody who's going to be against it. And you have to have some fortitude and say, this is the right thing to do. We're going to move forward with it.
I think it's basically about being able to have the conversation and being open to hearing what people have to say about their concerns. I mean, because they're not unwarranted in many cases. Sometimes they're anecdotal and they have had an experience of, driving through an area and it gets very congested and they think, oh, this additional density is going to cause that to be even worse. And that's probably the case. And the argument about my kids are going to die on this road, I'm also a big proponent of safe streets initiatives. And I've done a lot of work in that area too. And it's not all about getting people from one place to another as quickly as possible when they're driving through an area that has a lot of uses and a lot of things going on. So I think there's so many external things that we need to have honest conversations about that would help alleviate some of the concern. People have a perception of affordable housing, hearkening back to the days when we had projects where we concentrated all the low-income housing in one area and we had these huge concentrations of poverty. And that is problematic, and we are moving away from that. But because people see that as affordable housing, whenever you propose to put something affordable near them, they think it's going to be that, which is not the policies of the city of Fort Worth. It is to have mixed income housing spread throughout the community so that we get away from that concentrations of poverty that has caused problems in the past.
And I'll say, and there's a dichotomy in Fort Worth. It's either a single family home or it's a multifamily, large, 300 unit development. And there's a range of housing types that we can have in Fort Worth that would provide density and affordability that isn't necessarily one of those two things. We could provide, single family attached housing in the form of townhomes or flats or in densities and in, a manner of development that would fit into any of our single family neighborhoods very, very well. But, I don't know whether it's a zoning code or a financing issue. We just don't have a lot of that in Fort Worth. And so I think, changes to our zoning ordinance to allow a larger mix of housing types, regardless of its affordability, would be a really great thing so that we can introduce some density into single family neighborhoods that are all on relatively large lots, and it would allow more people to live in the neighborhood.
We're talking about housing prices. This is a community meeting, right? And you invited the community. It just seems tone deaf to not talk about homelessness and evictions, particularly in this community. So it's cool that we're talking about real estate on that medium part of it, right, of ownership. But how do we address homelessness and evictions and those things that are happening in these communities that we're talking about? Neighborhood services was talking about stop sticks and the development and all of those things. But I've heard from community members of how they felt uprooted, separated from their communities. So it scares me that we're having conversations like this in rooms that look like this instead of outside with community members and asking them what they really want to see and how they want to move forward. Specifically Wesleyan, right? It's developing, it's growing, there's plans, but that's not what Poly wants. Nobody's going out there and asking what exactly the community wants to see and how they want to be included. So we're having a conversation about who doesn't want to have affordable housing housing in their community. Let's talk about who doesn't want to have developments that don't include the community, right? Maybe concentrate on that part of the conversation. So I just want to know all of y'all's thoughts about that, and what are you doing to include community members in these conversations instead of just keeping these conversations in rooms with people that look like this?
Great question, by the way. So,
End of the question.
yeah. Did you get all that, by the way? I know she was far back in the back, so.
Well, I think that the title of this was about the American dream of homeownership. So if our comments have seen focused on homeownership and housing related to homeownership, that's why. So, you know, I don't mean for you to think that we were ignoring that, or that we ignore that as a city, because that's absolutely not true. We've spent a long time. Tara Perez, who heads our Direction Home team, is here. We have city staff and city programs to affect homelessness. A lot of our partners in addressing homeless services are here today, so that's certainly a concern of ours. Relating to developments like Stop 6, for example, Fort Worth Housing Solutions and the city engaged deeply with that neighborhood over a period of 2 years to develop the plans for that new neighborhood that's being developed, and have deeply engaged with that community to ensure that the housing types are there. While Cabell Place was closed, torn down, and a lot of its residents relocated, they all have the first right to come back to the neighborhood in affordable housing. So we make sure that, you know, even if we have to move people to rebuild, that those are the folks that get to move back to their neighborhood to reestablish the connections that they previously had. And it's really important to all of us, and it's actually federal law. So we're definitely going to be doing that. So.
And I think in the role that I play now, I mean, that is something that I'm passionate about. I've always been someone who's engaged in the neighborhoods that I live in, and I know that that's not the case for a lot of people. A lot of people see the city as something separate from themselves. They don't, you know, going to City Hall is an intimidating thing to do. A lot of people don't have time to do those things. So some of the work that I'm doing now is that definite intentionality of going into communities and having these conversations with the communities so that they are having a say and being a part of that conversation about what they want to see happen in their communities, so that they're not resistant to the improvements that they should have been getting all along when the city finally decides to refocus and have more equity in the distribution of the improvements that they bring, because of fear of gentrification and displacement. So we need to be honest about those things, that when values improve and things go up and places are nicer, then your taxes go up, because we rely very heavily on property tax in this state. So we need to make sure that we're talking about those things and finding ways to discourage the displacement so that or alleviate the displacement so that we are not against having the improvements come to those neighborhoods that they've deserved for years. But having those conversations and being informed and speaking the language and having the language that people speak literally, Spanish and not just in English, and then also ETJ and all the things that we planners talk about can make it very intimidating and concerning, and people resist being involved in those conversations when they don't.
And just a real quick comment, just to alleviate some of the concerns about that. There was great care, I know, by the Housing Authority and the city, even when they shut down Lincoln Terrace, tore those down to rebuild better apartment communities. When the decision was made about Butler, shutting down Butler, Cabell, there was a lot of care and concern and efforts put into retraining the residents of those areas so that they could either make a decision to, you know, move outside, be self-sufficient in there. So we, you know, it wasn't just a decision, go in, move them out, shut it down, and then they're out on the streets. There was a lot of concern about that, and the, you know, the communities were involved, the residents were involved in what was going on. So I think they did a pretty good job of taking care of that.
I got time for one more question. And there's two hands back here, one in the back's been on for about 10 minutes. So last question, sir.
Okay, and I'll make this real quick. The laws, what is it, when they talk about development, and I do say we do need the city. My name is Johnny Lewis, I don't hide from nobody. just in case you want to call me later and cuss me out. But when we talk about loss of community concept, when I live in the historic South Side, we have been fighting for years for some of the things y'all talk about. And when the guy was talking about redlining, we know what redlining is because we had people over there. So when you talk about that, when we talk about loss of concept, when you talk about safety and security, every time you build a new development, can you tell us how you're going to ensure that we can still have the safety and security concepts that we've been looking at and begging for years? When you're talking about building housing, when they're talking about all this new development, I don't see the part of your problem is your sewers are busting, but I don't see anything going in. How are you going to, with all this new development going in, what plans have been made to go in and redevelop those water and sewer lines? And when you talk about transportation, one of the amenities we talked about 20 years ago was talking about when they built out the Alliance, we were trying to get transportation so people wouldn't have to drive their cars. So how are you going to deal with that now? We got all these developers coming in here. They're buying up the houses. Every time you build a house, a developer's coming in and they can pay more, like I think someone said before. They can come in and they can pay more for that house than the average family can that's been waiting and saving for a house. When we talk about food deserts, I still live in a food desert. What are you talking about? We're building all these new houses. There are no amenities. We don't have drugstores. We don't have grocery stores. There's none there. We did a drill down years ago, and we saw that people in my community were spending money, but there are no grocery stores. The grocery store was there, publicly said they didn't care about black folk coming in there buying, but they didn't care at all. So that's it, and I see some people looking at the watching. And we're talking about the historical design. Okay, let me tell you something. In some communities, they don't even tear down houses. You can't even tear down stuff. So yeah, we want that historical overlay. I was one of those people who fought for the historical overlay. And I need to know if you're gonna go to the bank, if you're gonna go downtown, if you're gonna go to the feds, why don't you ask them also why they never put the money in the community that we were begging them to put in for the banks to redo it.
You got a question?
Yeah, I have a question. And it was recently published in 2021 that 50+% of the homes, existing homes in Fort Worth, were purchased by investors. Imagine if those 50%, that demand went away, what would that do to housing prices today? And my question is, Canada recently imposed a 2-year moratorium on international investors in single-family homes up there. And Dallas has announced that they're looking into trying to hem in institutional investors buying up the single-family. Is Fort Worth considering something similar, and would it be prudent to possibly reach out to Dallas?
Great question.
So a lot of those questions that just came up were for people who are not on this panel, but they definitely are resources to go to get answers to those questions. Talking about water and sewer and infrastructure being overtaxed by development that's coming in, that's a transportation public works question, and they definitely are looking at the condition of those things and making improvements as they go, but the budget does not repair all of it as timely as necessary. And as far as transportation to areas of employment, like Alliance area, there is a redesign of the bus system, and there's some express and use of the managed lanes to get people to those places faster. And then there's been also zip zones put in place so that when you arrive at those destinations and you're on a huge campus and you don't want to walk across a big, huge parking lot to get to your job, there's zip zones, which are on-demand transit like Uber, but not as door-to-door. So there's some resources for those things. The question that you asked about putting a moratorium, okay, I would say that this community and Texas as a whole, but Fort Worth in particular, is a little resistant to regulating and over-regulating, and very proud of the idea of being a low regulation place. And so I'm not a policymaker anymore at the city, and that would be a policy decision for council members and elected folks now about whether they are looking at putting moratoriums on those kind of things that are causing these problems. But I think that it's something that definitely should be discussed because it is a major problem. I know that one of the big, what is the real estate online thing that was buying up a bunch of houses and then stopped recently? Zillow. So they found that to not be a very good return on their investment, I think. They were unable to get supply chain stuff to flip those houses. So I think that is ebbing a little bit, but it's still definitely an issue. And I don't know if you do it city by city, but definitely we always should reach out to other communities that are doing things that should be considered.
Don's final word real quick.
Yeah, in the building industry, I mean, the investor thing is has become more and more of an issue over the past 2 or 3 years. As a developer, when I build a new community and I create a homeowners association, typically to put in place certain rules. I know HOAs have some bad raps, but when your neighbor wants to park 2 work trucks in an RV all in front of his house every night, you wish you had some restrictions. So we try and put, reasonable restrictions to maintain the value of the neighborhood and the integrity of the neighborhood. One thing that I cannot do legally is prevent people from renting houses in the neighborhoods that I develop. That, I can tell them they can't put a for rent sign in their front yard, but I have to let them put it in the window. And so we can't, as an industry, we can't legally tell them, no, you can't do it. I will tell you, over the past couple of years, many builders have limited or stopped selling homes in communities to investors because of the issue, because of the backlash, and because it went from a guy wanting to buy a home out of 100 or whatever else, and then put it up for rent or whatever. That happens in almost every community, frankly, at some point. Or somebody moves to a new house, they keep their old house, and they just put it up for rent instead of selling it because they can afford to. But builders have gotten a lot of backlash from buyers about having 20 homes out of 100, being bought by one investor becoming rentals. And a lot of builders are trying to limit that as much as they can. But when you have an individual coming in, sometimes you're not sure if they're an investor or not, and they don't have to tell you if they are. So it's a problematic thing for our industry. And what we see right now is basically a lot of institutional money are building entire subdivisions to be investment/rental communities. And they're essentially competing with us for a new home buyer, or if they can't, or a rental of a single family home, detached home. And so we're not real happy about that as an industry, and it's something that we do struggle with. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that all that institutional money, as you said, affordable housing, in-town housing, there's a massive amount of money, and this is not just Fort Worth, Texas. This is any viable housing market city in the United States. We're seeing a ton of institutional money chasing resales and new homes as investments. And I don't know what the answer is, but it is something that we're concerned about as an industry.
So thank you for having us. Thank you to our panel for attending. I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
Thank you, Travis. It is, as you said, such a broad topic, and there's so much that we can and should cover yet. And our plan as Fort Worth Report is to continue to have these community conversations as close to 1 a month as we can. And obviously, there's so many different topics people raise, gentrification, other things that we really want to cover. Our next Candid Conversation is going to be in August, so stay tuned for that. It's on public education, specifically focused on Fort Worth ISD. I think you'll find that really a good conversation as well. I want to thank our sponsors that make this possible again. Today, Texas Wesleyan, Southside Bank, and North Texas Community Foundation. It's really important to have all the community support for us to have these conversations. And I encourage you to keep reading the Fort Worth Report, because we're going to take all these conversations that we have and reach out to everybody to do journalism that really goes deeper than what people have traditionally seen. And part of our mission is to amplify voices of people who have traditionally not been heard. So I encourage you all to continue to connect with our journalists. We've got journalists scattered across the room here, and our offices are just on Rosedale across the street, so come see us anytime. We also have coming out, I wanted to tell everybody about the business report. It's our Monday business newsletter led by Bob Francis in the back there, and our business team, Sandra Zadeh, who's over in the back too, and Seth Bodine is over here. That's every Monday. It's focused on all these types of business issues and what isn't business actually. It all comes back to the money and how do we make it work. So hope you keep reading that. And speaking of money, this is on the table here. And it's handy dandy, you just scan that QR code and it'll help you donate directly to the Fort Worth Report. Because our mission is to provide journalism for free to everybody. Our newsletters, all of our website is free for you to read. But it's not free to produce journalism, so we only produce it because of all the support from all of you. So thank you again, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Try to stay cool, and let's give our moderator, our panelists,